Hello and welcome to the Bhagavatam. Today we're coming to the last part of the sixth canto. And our topic today is around women, feminism, power of women. And it's a topic that has taken the world by storm in the past 60 years. And we've seen female empowerment reach its peak and be unquestioned for the longest time. That there was an inequality between men and women. And yet, as we've tried to establish that equality, we find that some of our experiments worked and some of them didn't. But for the most part, what happened was that women tried to compete with men and be equal to them. And that seemed like a very reasonable and fair proposition. After all beings are equal. Even the United States Constitution says all people are equal under the eyes of God, and so it is. So what happened? Over the years, we noticed a lot of things worked and a lot of things didn't. Where things didn't work was primarily in the area of relationships. We found that men began to adapt and develop more feminine qualities to cope with women's empowerment. We found that some men maintained a very strong masculine posturing, and eventually a lot of women became very attracted to that. So there were a lot of things going on in this experiment. But today we're not going to go into that. Today is not a study of the social mores of our times, but rather we're going to tap into some of the ancient practices of female empowerment, some of which were good, some of which were not. That's up to you to decide. And we're going to look at it from a more objective lens. We're going to take a look and see what works, what doesn't, what we can take from the past, and how we can add that to the present and maybe come up with something that works even better for all of us. Ultimately, we need to explore what is the effect of control and power in relationships. Why is it needed? Why is power needed, and does it benefit anyone? What are the solutions and ways to get free from the power trap? Or is it perhaps just an ego trap? Join us as we explore some of these topics through the ancient wisdom of the Vedas, which were revealed to us by the wisest people who ever lived on this planet. So before we dive in, I want to do a little bit of a recap, because everything we're going to talk about today really depends upon the last few episodes. We started off by talking about someone who was known as Indra. Indra was the king of the heavenly planets. And Indra is talked about in almost, I think, most countries of the world. There is some version of Indra. And usually they're borrowed from the same source, from the Vedas, because the Vedic culture spread all over the world. And we're now coming up with evidence to prove that the Vedic culture did not end up in India, but rather began from India and spread everywhere. And so the Greek gods and what you come across in the other countries as well, all the way into Europe and even Nordic countries, their gods are very much based upon some of the concepts that come from India. Now, again, that's a video for another time, but Indra was known to be the king of the demigods, the devas. This does not mean he's the supreme being. It doesn't mean he's the creator or God, the supreme entity. But Indra was the most powerful of all the devas or demigods. Now, he'd become very proud. You know how it is when someone gets a lot of power, a lot of fame, a lot of beauty, a lot of opulences. They become very proud. And so it was with Indra. See if we can get his picture on here. Yeah. And with that, Indra then, with his pride became kind of easygoing. and the asuras, the sort of more demonic creatures in the world. And it's very important to understand the Vedas as they talk about asuras, devas and asuras, people of a divine nature, people of a demonic nature. By that, they're not talking about these Halloween type demons that they try to create out here and these ghoulish characters. No, asura simply means people who were against God, who saw that, like we have today, we have atheists, we have people who believe that there is nothing that caused the creation. Everything is just the product of chance biochemical combinations, big bangs, things like that. Asuras essentially are those beings not only who are atheistic, but also who behave in ways that are harmful to others. For example, a psychopath might be one of those, or some kind of tyrant, or some kind of person who thinks that everything centers around them and they can do whatever they want with others. People are just there for their pleasure and they can be used and abused in any way they feel like. Bullies, people like that. So it's not purely an atheist thing. It is really about character and qualities that a person has. So I want to be really clear about that. And devas or demigods are people who have divine qualities. Those are qualities that you'll find even amongst human, qualities of kindness, compassion, qualities of love, qualities of generosity. These are the qualities of the demigods or the devas. So with that in mind, let's move forward. Indra had become very proud. And because he was very proud, he had sort of let down his guard. And the asuras, the more demonic characters, they had sort of started attacking his heavenly planets. And, suddenly everything was in trouble. And Indra began to seek help. And in the process of seeking help, he employed a guru, someone as his guru, found that that guy was actually also in cahoots with the asuras, the demonic guys. And so as a result of which he killed him. And so that guy's father, in turn, unleashed a very powerful demon called Vritrasura onto the devas, onto the demigods. So let's throw in some more pictures here so you can get an idea of that. That was Indra. And let's see what else we've got here. Okay. Right. Okay, Vritrasura. So out of a fire sacrifice came Vritrasura. And then Indra ultimately ended up killing Vritrasura. Now, at this point, the story takes a turn. The question is asked, this Vritrasura, because as he starts to speak, turns out to be a really wonderful person, actually a very wise, a very spiritual, a very evolved soul. And so the question is being asked, how is it possible that such an evolved soul was in a sort of demonic body and was engaged in, horrible acts? So to answer that question, the story goes to the root to find out what was the past life of Vritrasura. And to understand that, we go into the life of King Chitraketu. And King Chitraketu had a son. He didn't have a son for a long time, tried, he got married again and again and again. And as kings go, they have many wives, and none of them was able to bear him a son. As we know in today's time, the problem was probably with the king himself. But in any case, finally, a sage came along and gave him the blessing that he could have a son if he did XYZ, and the son would be the cause of his great happiness and lamentation. The king was thrilled and delighted and ended up having a son. Now, the king favored the wife with whom he'd had the son, and ultimately all the other wives became jealous and poisoned the son. That son who had been poisoned then was now, as he would lay there dead, the king was bereft out of his mind in grief and sorrow and lamentation, and life was not worth living. And the great sages, Angira and Narad, appeared at that time before him. They have a way of appearing at the right time, right? And at that point, they gave him enlightening instructions, so much so that they even had that child come back into his body and talked to the father. And the child said to his father, "Which father are you? I've had so many fathers and mothers, and which one are you? And I've been in so many species, I don't know. And why should I come back? And I don't care about having a kingdom and, palaces and all this stuff. It doesn't really matter. I'm a soul. I don't really care about all this stuff." And with that, the father became enlightened. He realized the futility of all his power and palaces and everything that he had. And he devoted himself to the divine, to spiritual evolution, and at that point reached a very high level. So once again, let's take a look at some of the pictures here. That was King Chitraketu. And King Chitraketu was visited by Angira and Narad. That's the child over there talking to the father. Now, as things went along, this king became very, very deeply spiritual, left everything, devoted himself to God, and ultimately he had what is called darshan. Darshan means he actually had a vision of God sitting before him, and the conversation that followed was most incredibly beautiful. Here's a scene from there. All right, so we'll kind of take off from here and see what happened next. Okay, so let's go back to that time. Let me see if I can, yeah. When he saw that supreme being, he was cleansed of all material contamination and became situated in his original spiritual consciousness. A lot of people tell me about how they feel spirituality is there for them to evolve. And I see this as a complete myth. Spirituality is not there for us to evolve. It's for us to come back home, back to who we are. We are already evolved beings. We are highly evolved as spiritual beings. But we get the option to play in this playground of the world and to have the option to not be that which we are, to be caught up by our mind, to be possessed by our mind and our intellect and our ego. And only when we can shed those layers and we realize the futility of this world and we shed the layers of mind, intellect, and ego are we able to find our way back home to who we actually are and have been always. And as we find our true self, we begin to realize this true self is connected to all other beings and all other parts of the universe. And then we begin to look for the source of that. And that source then is that divine being or God. And what that means in the Vedas is very different than what they talk about in other religions, because in the Vedas, they talk about the God as a being who is loving, not fearful, a being who is playful, not serious, a being who is wanting a relationship with us, who wants to love us in any way that we'd like to be in love with God. It could be as a child, it could be as our child, it could be as not just our parent, but also as a lover, as a friend, in any way that we desire. All possibilities open up when you enter into the realm of divine love. So Chitraketu, when he had that darshan, that vision of God, see, God in the Vedas can be impersonal and a light and, that kind of impersonal thing, but can also be a being if you so choose, because only with a being can you have a relationship. So when he had darshan, he saw that divine being, tears of love and affection flowed from his eyes, and his voice choked in ecstasy, and he couldn't speak for a long time. And then gradually he began to say, "O Supreme Lord, if persons obsessed with material desires for sense gratification, just like he was, through material opulence worship you, who are the source of all knowledge and are transcendental to material qualities, they, too, will no longer be subject to material rebirth. Just as a sterilized or fried seed does not produce plants." So in other words, that person who reaches that place of connecting with the divine will no longer produce karma and will therefore no longer sow the seeds that bring him back life after life. He says living entities are subjected to the repetition of birth and death because they are conditioned by material nature. It's a very powerful statement. We are conditioned by material nature. Think about it. How much of what you think and feel and believe is really from you, and how much of it is from the outside world? How much of you is you, and how much of you is what is a collection of all the different data and inputs that the world has placed upon you, from family and friends, the traumas we experience, the hurts we go through, the experiences we have. We're a collection of all of that. But who's the one having that experience? Who is the one collecting that data? When you come deep, as you peel off the layers of that onion, you begin to understand what lies within us. So he says, just as you are transcendental, telling the divine supreme being, just as you are transcendental, one who is inclined to associate with you in transcendence escapes the conditions of material nature. The example is given of when you take an iron rod and you put it in fire, that iron rod becomes like fire. It is now hot. It has that same quality that fire has to burn. And just by association. So association is such a powerful thing. People even say in today's time that you are the sum total of the people you associate with, right? But imagine if you were associating with the divine. Now, of course, there's many ways to do that. I mean, when you go into nature, you're associating with the divine. When you chant the names of God, a mantra, when you pray, when you go to a place of worship, you are associating with the divine. But when you become identified with that, see, we might go into a meditation, but then we'll come back into our head. We might get out of our head for a little while. We might go into a place of worship and we might engage in some kind of activity. But then again, we come back into our life. It is only when our identity changes that we realize that I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my experiences, I'm not my life story. I am a spiritual being. Now, some might say, oh, that's some way of, bypassing the human condition. No. It's first recognizing the true self, and then from that self, having the experience. See, you can continue to have the same experience of thoughts, emotions, experiences, and everything else. But one is to be under the clutches of the mind, and the other is to be free of the mind and to begin to be able to have that experience as a liberated being. It's a very different way of living. All right, so let's come now into the part that I started off with talking to you about, and that is the position of the living entity in this world and our connection with the divine feminine. So, as I told you earlier, there was a lot that's gone on in these last few chapters. And then after Chitraketu, the king, had this experience of Ananta Shesh. Ananta means eternal, the divine being, the eternal being. And he offered his respects. He was now free. He was liberated. He was enlightened. And as the ruler of the planet of the Vidyadharas, he was praised by great sages and saints as the most powerful mystic yogi. He was now going to enjoy life for millions of years without any deterioration of his body, mind, or senses. And you might say, oh, this is so fantastic. How can it be? There are realms beyond our knowing, and not everything goes as it does out here in this physical material world, especially on Earth. There are other planetary systems, there are other levels of consciousness, and there are other realities. So please allow your mind to stay open, and let's continue trying to understand what the Vedas are communicating to us. It says, in the valley of the Sumer mountain, he enjoyed life with women of his planet, while chanting the glories of the Supreme Being Hari. Once, while traveling in outer space, in a brilliant, effulgent airplane given to him by Vishnu, so in other words, a space vehicle given to him by Vishnu, he saw Shiva sitting, embracing Parvati on his lap with his arm in an assembly of great saintly persons. So, I don't know if you're familiar with Shiva. Shiva is considered the most highly evolved being in the universe. And he has a partner, Parvati. For most of the time, he's engaged in meditation. But then there are times he's with his partner, with his beloved. Now, there are people who will tell you that Shiva is the supreme being or God. That's not quite what the Vedas say. There are people who want to believe that, and so the Vedas are very kind. They give you, if you want to believe that something is God, then sure, go right ahead. But the Vedas make it very clear, especially the Bhagavad Gita makes it very clear, that the divine supreme being is Krishna, and from Krishna comes Vishnu, and Vishnu comes, has many names, Narayan, Hari, Vasudeva, etc., etc. In any case, so here is Shiva, the most highly evolved being in the universe, sitting with his beloved Parvati, his wife, amongst a group of saintly people. Now, typically, that's not how you don't go into very intimate or, how do you say, acts of public displays of affection. When you're among saintly people, you let your focus be on them, and you listen to what they have to say. But Shiva is beyond all of that. He is not controlled by the rules of this world. So Chitraketu, this king who had now become liberated and a great mystic yogi, and he'd had the darshan of the divine, and he had gone from being on the earth to being on some heavenly planet, and he began to laugh loudly. He referred to Shiva and said, "You are the spiritual master of everyone, the best of all living entities, the one who teaches Dharma. And nevertheless, you are seated with your wife on your lap in the midst of saintly persons, and you're embracing her as if you were a shameless, ordinary human being. Ordinary conditioned souls generally embrace their wives and enjoy their company in solitary places. How wonderful it is that Mahadeva, the greatest of all demigods, of all devas, although a great master of austerity, is embracing his wife openly in the midst of an assembly of great saints." On hearing him, Shiva, the most powerful personality whose knowledge is fathomless, simply smiled and remained silent. And all those assembled around him too didn't say anything. Chitraketu, the king, did not know the powers of Shiva and Parvati. He thought of himself as better than Shiva at controlling his senses. By the way, have you noticed Shiva just smiled? He did not take any offense. His ego was not upset. Because why? What would happen to you? What would happen to me? How would we react if somebody insulted us like this? Would we react? Would we say something? Perhaps. We'd be offended. We'd be hurt. We'd feel insulted. We might say something back. Yes. And for most of us, we might think it's normal. But Shiva smiled. Why do you think he smiled? Because a truly evolved person knows that when someone is saying something like that, they're really talking about themselves. They're not talking about them. And so that person becomes compassionate, becomes concerned, like, what's going on with this person here? Right? They don't take the offense. They don't take the blame. They don't take the accusation. It's a really difficult thing to do. I know I struggle with it, and somebody tries to say something mean or rude or harsh. It's really hard to take. The ego wants to defend. The ego wants to protect. But for someone who has gone beyond the ego, that's not what happens. Shiva smiled. Now, on the other hand, if something like that happened to your loved one, that might be a whole different story. In this case, Parvati, Shiva's wife was sitting next to him, in fact, on his lap, and she was very offended for her husband, not for herself, but for her husband. Parvati said, "Has this upstart now received a post from which to punish shameless persons like us? Has he been appointed ruler, carrier of the rod of punishment? Is he now the only master of everything?" You can see there's a tinge of sarcasm in there. Have all saintly people throughout the universe forgotten the religious principles because they have not tried to stop Shiva from behaving improperly? Like is everybody else wrong because they didn't stop Shiva, she's saying? And is this guy the only one that now suddenly has the code of conduct and he's going to come and tell Shiva what to do? Then she continues, "This Chitraketu is the lowest of kings because he has insulted Shiva, who is worshipped by all the devas, all the demigods, and highly evolved beings. Shiva is dharma personified." Dharma is beyond religion even. Dharma is the very nature, the very fabric of humanity, of who we are, of society, of culture, of everything. So he is dharma personified and the spiritual master of the entire world. Chitraketu is puffed up because of his achievements, thinking, "I am the best." He does not deserve to approach the shelter of Vishnu's lotus feet, which are worshipped by all saintly people, for he is impudent, thinking himself greatly important. He must be punished. Then she said to him, "O impudent one, my dear son, now take birth in a low, sinful family of demons, so that you will not commit such an offense again towards exalted, saintly persons in this world." When Chitraketu was cursed by Parvati, he descended from his magnificent airplane. He bowed down before her with great humility. Now, Chitraketu himself could have again gone back and cursed Parvati, or he could have nullified the curse, but he did none of that. Instead, he got off from his airplane, bowed down before her with great humility. With folded hands, he accepted the curse as a result of his bad karma. He said, "Deluded by ignorance, the living entity wanders in the forest of this material world, enjoying the happiness and distress resulting from his past deeds. Therefore, my dear mother, neither you nor I are to be blamed for this incident." Very interesting that he points out that neither you nor I are to be blamed for this incident. In this material world, neither the living entity himself nor others, friends and enemies, are the cause of material happiness and distress. But because of gross ignorance, the living entity thinks that he and others are the cause. This piece of wisdom here is so precious. I really want you to contemplate it. You know, we constantly, well, I can't say you, but a lot of us find blame in others. We blame others for our unhappiness. You did this to me. You said this. You behaved in this way. You acted like this. And we blame others, or sometimes we blame ourselves. Some people are really good at blaming themselves. They're constantly fault-finding with themselves. Others are constantly fault-finding with others, and sometimes they're fault-finding with their politicians or with other people on the street, or like road rage, blaming folks who are driving. Different forms of blame are how we manage to navigate this world. Some people blame their parents for their childhood, others blame their colleagues at work, others blame their managers, others blame it's just like a blame game. One country will blame another. You did this to me, so I'm going to do that to you. And in all these ways, we continue to perpetuate the cycle of action and reaction, karma. And because of that karmic cycle, we continue to stay in this world, experiencing the positive and negative effects of our karma. That is why we take birth again and again. So one who can disassociate from this blame game, Disassociate from thinking that others are the cause of my happiness or distress. Either the world is the cause, or people are the cause, or my mind is the cause, or I am the cause. No. Stop. Stop, 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 stop. Instead, understand the karmic cycle is going on. Let it unwind. Do not interact. Do not get entangled again. It's very tempting to act and react, to blame and to accuse, to fault find and to criticize. Stop. Stop criticizing yourself. Stop criticizing others. Stop criticizing the world. Stop finding fault. And nor am I saying to be positive. Be neither positive nor negative. Neither seek happiness nor try to avoid distress. Let things occur as they're meant to. It's very hard to do because the mind is not geared to do that. And that is why awakening is so important. The mind wants to see the fault, wants to protect oneself, wants to create boundaries, wants to create defenses. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying to get into a place of true spiritual evolution, we have to peel off the layers of mind, intellect, and ego. And what is ego? Ego is identity. Identity that this is me. If this is not me, then who is the person accusing? Who is the person blaming? If that is not you, you are just that spiritual spark and there is this thing. And who am I accusing? Very often what I'm accusing and blaming, actually the faults are as much in me as they are in the other. Wrongdoer, fault finder, one and the same. I'd come across this line once and I loved it. Wrongdoer, fault finder, one and the same. What we see in others lies within us. We are not free. If we were actually free, we would see only that which is best in others. Overlook their flaws. We'll see the flaws, but we'll just not hold on to them, not cling on to that, not make them something to be attached to. This material world, Chitraketu says, resembles the waves of a constantly flowing river. Therefore, what is a curse and what is a favor? What are the heavenly planets and what are the hellish planets? What is actually happiness and what is actually distress? Because the waves flow constantly, none of them has an eternal effect. What are these waves he's talking about? The waves of happiness and distress, the waves of ups and downs of life. You know how it is with a wave. A wave rises and then falls. Situations arise and then they disappear. Where do they disappear? Back into where they came from. Now, how we react to those situations is really what keeps us entangled. Our reactions. What our reactions come from? It begins with how we think about that situation, what we make out of it, what meaning we give to it. From there come our emotions. From our emotions come our reactions. But if we recognize that neither happiness nor distress, all of that, rather, that both happiness and distress are created here. They are the product of this. As such, the events just occur. The waves of time and events just rise and fall. They have no eternal existence. Nothing lasts forever. Whatever somebody said, they said in a moment. But now we hold on to it and it's in our head all the time, spinning. They said this, they said that, they did this, they did that. But that's here. The event happened in a few seconds. We held on to the event. We held on to what somebody said or did. And now it torments us. And we blame them. But what if we didn't hold on to it? There's a story that I've once or a few times perhaps narrated where Buddha was being insulted by someone. And after this guy yelled and accused him of being a fraud and so on, the guy went away after a while. And Buddha was just sitting there very calmly and coolly. And one of his disciples asked, Master, why is it that you're not affected by what this person said? And he says, if someone gives you a gift and you do not accept it, then who does the gift belong to? So he had not taken what this guy had given. And therefore, what answer the question for yourself. Who does the gift belong to? So that is how we can free ourselves from anything affecting us. Again, I know it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for all of us. But we need to encourage each other and support each other. And truly, once we are locked into reaction and in emotion, one can't say these things at that time, to someone who is already in the throes of an emotion or in the throes of a reaction. They're not going to hear you. It's best to train oneself beforehand, to catch oneself beforehand and break the interpretation, the meaning, the twist that our mind is giving it. Oh, this person said this and this means that. Catch it there and then you can nip it in the bud. Chitraketu continues, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Being, is one, unaffected by the conditions of the world. He creates all the conditioned souls. He is equally disposed towards all living entities. Therefore, no one is very dear to him. No one is a great enemy for him. No one is his friend and no one is his relative. Being unattached to the material world, he has no affection for so-called happiness or hatred or so-called distress. The two terms, happiness and distress, are relative. Since he is always happy, for him there is no question of distress. And that happiness he's talking about here is Sat Chit Ananda. Ananda is very different than the happiness of this world. The happiness of this world is relative. When I get what I want, I'm happy. When I don't get what I want, or if things go other than the way I want, or if things upset what I have, then I'm unhappy. Right? I want to get a certain job, and if I don't get it, then I'm unhappy. I want to find I like a certain person, I want them to be my partner, and they reject me. I'm unhappy. But when I get what I want, I'm delighted, I'm over the moon. But Ananda is different. Ananda has no cause. True bliss, true happiness has no cause. That which has a cause can also be taken away. And the moment it's taken away, there's distress. But the happiness that has no cause can never be taken away because there was nothing causing it. It was arising spontaneously from within. That is the nature of the divine, of the Supreme Being, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's what he's saying. He is always happy. Why? He is in Ananda. His nature is Ananda. Sat means eternal. Chit means consciousness. And Ananda. The very nature of that divine being is blissfulness. It is also our nature. It is our true nature, our soul's nature, to be blissful. That is why we seek happiness in the world. If you ask anybody, what do you want? They want to be happy. Why do you want to be happy? Because it's your nature. And you're looking for it in the world. But it isn't in the world, it's within you. That which we seek, we already are. It's not something you have to become. You cannot become happy. You are the source of that happiness. And the moment you clear your mind, the moment you clear all your wants and needs and desires, you'll notice you're happy for no reason. Nothing has happened. You're just feeling great. So that's our natural self emerging, our spiritual self, our soul. And learning how to walk this fine line between the human and the spiritual parts of ourselves is very important. Learning how to embrace both sides, but also recognizing that one is the true self and the other is the experience we're having. It's like when I go to Disneyland, I'm having an experience. I am not Mickey Mouse and I'm not any of those characters out there. They're part of the experience I'm having. But I get to know that I will leave this place and go back home. I've just come here for an adventure. That's the perspective we need to have. Then scream, yell, enjoy, experience, do all of it. but recognize that this is not where I belong, this is not who I am, and this is not where I will continue to be. I know I need to find my way through this maze and work my way back home. So he continues, contaminated by the material energy, the living entity is put into ignorance and thus into different conditions of bondage, of pious and impious activities, which result in happiness and distress, good fortune and bad, bondage and liberation, birth and death. Again, very, very profound, very amazing. He says, contaminated by the material energy, the living entity is put into ignorance. So we are ignorant of what? Ignorant of who we truly are. We know lots of things. We're not ignorant in that. He's not talking about material intelligence. He's talking about spiritual intelligence. We are in spiritual ignorance of the true self of who we are. And because of that, we engage in different kinds of activities, pious, good deeds, and bad deeds. The pious deeds have good results, and the impious activities have bad results. So therefore, this results in happiness and distress, good fortune and bad fortune, bondage and liberation, birth and death. Either way, we continue to be in this world experiencing birth, death, old age, and disease. Either way, we are conditioned. To become free of this is to not become caught up in the act of being either good or bad, of being right or being wrong. We don't want to do any of that. As long as there is duality, there is bondage. As long as we are caught up in duality, happiness and distress are dualities. Good and bad are dualities. Right and wrong is dualities. We want to be free. Dualities are products of the mind. They are created by the mind, and they keep us trapped in the mind. He then says to Parvati, "O mother, you are now unnecessarily angry, but since all my happiness and distress are destined by my past activities, I do not plead to be excused or relieved from your curse. Although what I have said is not wrong, please let whatever you think is wrong be pardoned." Chitraketu then boarded his airplane and left. When Shiva and Parvati saw that Chitraketu, although informed of the curse, was unafraid, they smiled, being astonished by his behavior. Shiva said, "My dear beautiful Parvati, have you seen the greatness of the devotees of God? Being servants of the Supreme Godhead Hari, these great souls are not interested in any kind of material happiness. They do not fear any condition of life. For them, the heavenly planets, liberation, that is moksha, and the hellish planets are all the same. They have perfect knowledge and detachment from this material world and are only interested in the service of God. The dualities of happiness and distress, birth and death, curses and favors are natural byproduct of this contact with the material world. As one mistakenly considers a flower garland to be a snake or experiences happiness and distress in a dream, so in the material world, by a lack of careful consideration, we differentiate between happiness and distress, considering one good and the other bad. This magnanimous Chitraketu is a dear devotee of the Supreme Being, Narayan. Such devotees are equal to all living entities and free from attachment, hatred, and envy. They are always peaceful and equal to everyone. So, here was Chitraketu cursed by Mother Durga. She's also known as Bhavani, Parvati, Durga. She's the wife of Shiva. And Chitraketu accepted birth in a demonic species of life. Again, keep clear, I'm not talking about some Hollywood version of demon. We're talking about people who are demonic by nature, hurtful to others, insensitive, cruel. Anyways, he took birth in such a species, and although still fully equipped with transcendental knowledge and a practical application of that knowledge in life, so he fully remembered his past life and his past knowledge. And that's an important piece to remember. The Bhagavad Gita says that. He says that whatever you acquire spiritually in this life, in any life, will always be with you. The spiritual growth you make will always be your eternal wealth, your eternal treasure. It will never be lost. Everything you own materially will be lost, but your spiritual growth is your eternal asset. Keep that in mind. That is why this is the most important thing you will ever do. Listening to the Bhagavatam like this is cultivating your spiritual knowledge and wisdom, and thereby your spiritual growth, and cultivating, therefore, your eternal wealth. So, although Chitraketu was born in a demonic species of or family, a species of life, he was fully equipped with transcendental knowledge and practical application of that knowledge in life. It's not enough to just know. You must know how to apply what you know. And then when there was that fire sacrifice performed by Twasta, that is the person whose son had been killed, and then he did the sacrifice, and then he wanted to attract this demon who would kill Indra. At that point, King Chitraketu became famous as Vritrasura, the demonic character that I had shown you a picture of earlier, and I will show it to you again. All right. If one hears this history of the Mahatma, the great soul Chitraketu, from a pure devotee, the listener is also freed from the conditional life of material existence. One who rises from bed early in the morning and recites this history of Chitraketu, controlling his words and mind and remembering the Supreme Godhead, will return home back to the spiritual universe without difficulty. All right, now the story moves a little further. There's more to be learned here. So we talked about the Asuras, the demons. They were actually the sons of Diti and Kashyap. Diti and Kashyap. Kashyap was a sage. He was a very evolved being. Now, Diti and Kashyap had one group of children that became Asuras or demonic, and the others who became Devas or demigods. Two of Diti's sons are very famous, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. Hiranyaksha we had talked about earlier on, about the third canto of the Bhagavatam, and Hiranyakashipu we'll be talking about pretty soon, because Hiranyakashipu's wife gave birth to Prahlad. And we're going to hear about the story of Prahlad and Hiranyakashipu pretty soon. Hiranyakashipu was a person who hated God, Vishnu, because Vishnu had killed his brother Hiranyaksha previous time. But both of them, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, there's a lot to be said. I don't think I'll get into it today. All right. So anyways, Diti and Kashyap. So they had Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha. They had some children who became demonic and others who became good, good son, bad son, like that. Now, Diti also had sons, the Maruts, who Indra gave the position of demigods. Because of the disturbance caused by the demon sons of Diti, Vishnu had killed the two brothers Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Now their mother, Diti, was overwhelmed with lamentation and anger. So what does a person do when they're angry? They become pretty hateful. Right? They want revenge. They want to get back at that person. If that person killed my son, then I want to kill him back. So Diti blamed Indra, because Indra was the cause. Indra, who is she said, this is what she said. She says, Indra, who is very fond of his sense gratification, of enjoying his senses, has killed my sons with the help of Vishnu. Indra is cruel, hard-hearted, and sinful. When will I, having killed him, rest with a pacified mind? See, a person who is very grieved like that sometimes thinks that if I have revenge, then I'll be able to rest. Then I will have a pacified mind. Such an illusion. There is no peace. Even when we have vengeance, there is no peace. Even when we get back at the other person, even if we hit them harder than they hit us, there is no peace. Why? Because we have become like them. We have become, the abused has become the abuser. The person who has been wronged has now become the wrongdoer. We're seeing this happen now in Israel. We're seeing it happen with Hamas. We're seeing, wrongdoers and then the retaliation, and we're seeing further wrong being done. It's just such a vicious cycle. Again, don't want to get into politics here, but just, this is just an example of how we can spin this wheel of hatred. So Diti says, when Indra is dead, so when someone is dead, the bodies of even kings and great leaders will be transformed into worms and stool or ashes. If one enviously kills others for the protection of such a body, does he not actually know the true interest of life? Certainly he does not. For if one is envious of other entities, he surely goes through hellish conditions. Indra considers his body eternal, and thus he has become unrestrained. I therefore wish to have a son who can remove Indra's madness. So she herself can't, kill Indra, so she says, I want to have a son who will destroy Indra. Our husband is a great sage, a saintly person. He's not going to do that kind of thing. That's not his thing. So she's come up with a plan. With service and love and humility and control, with words spoken very sweetly to satisfy her husband, Kashyap, and with smiles and glances at him, Diti attracted his mind and brought it under her control. Kashyap was a great sage, a very wise and learned scholar. He was captivated by Diti's behavior, which brought him under her control. And he said, Kashyap said, O beautiful, irreproachable lady, since I am very much pleased by your behavior, you may ask me for any benediction you want. If a husband is pleased, what desires are difficult for his wife to obtain, either in this world or in the next? So this is another way, you can nag your partner to get what you want. A lot of times people don't know how to get their needs met. They might nag their partner, they might yell at them, they might try all kinds of techniques, But Diti is using seduction. She's using love and service and humility and sweet words to attract her husband's mind. And she's being effective. She's getting the result she wants. And her husband is owning up to it, like, if I'm pleased. It's not very difficult for a man to be pleased. I mean, after all, if he feels he's successful at pleasing his wife, if he feels that he can do something to make her happy, he's over the moon. He doesn't need a whole lot. Just knowing that he can make her happy is his happiness. So he says, my dear wife, whose body is so beautiful, he's enamored with his wife. A conscientious wife should be very chaste and should abide by the orders of her husband. She should be very devoutly worship her husband as the representative of God, Vasudeva. Now, this is an aspect of Western culture that people just cannot understand. They're like, oh my God, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. But this is how power structures in relationships were dissolved. Instead of people trying to be or compete for power in relationships, they recognized in ancient times that there needed to be a hierarchy. Today they want equality. The problem with that is that, have the feminism, have the control, have all of that, but then you find that you don't respect your husband because now he's become a wimp, he's become a beta, he's become someone you can't respect, right? And so then there's affairs happen, divorces happen, all kinds of things happen. And then women go around chasing the guy who's the alpha, who's the one who's, successful, rich, who's in control, who's in command. It is natural for a woman to want the man to be a leader, to lead. And because of feminism, it's become very hard to have both these realities exist side by side. Very often we see that because of these mixed up ideas of modern time, both men and women are highly confused. So by looking at some of these ancient examples, we begin to learn that if there is a sense of hierarchy, then there can be a sense of peace. If man can be truly inspired to be the leader, I'm not saying all men are great leaders. They're not sometimes. But there needs to be somebody in charge. You can't have a company without a leader. You can't have an organization of any kind, whether it's a country, whether it's a business, or even a family, without a leader. And most couples will never talk about who's in charge. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Who's the ultimate person who's going to take decisions? Who's competent to do that? I think that's a big issue we need to look at. In any case, out here, in the case of Diti and Kashyap, Kashyap was wise and scholarly and powerful as a yogi. So Diti asked for the benediction from him because he was willing to give her anything. She asked for the benediction that she would have an immortal son who could kill Indra, because Indra, with the help of Vishnu, had killed her sons. When Kashyap heard this, he was very aggrieved. He said, "Oh my God," he lamented. "Now I face the danger," he says, "of the impious act of killing Indra. I have now become too attached to material enjoyment. Taking advantage of this, my mind has been attracted by the illusion, by Maya, the illusory energy of God in the form of my wife, and I'm surely a wretched person because now I'm going to engage in an inauspicious act, and that's going to result in bad karma. My wife has adopted a means that follows her nature, and therefore she is not to be blamed. But I am a man, I am spiritual, I am wise, I should have known better. Therefore all condemnation upon me. I am not at all conversant with what is good for me, since I could not control my senses." See, in the Vedas, there's a lot of emphasis put in controlling one's senses. Whereas in today's world, it's like, no, just go enjoy your senses. Go enjoy. And as a result of which, we're chasing our senses all over, like someone, like a dog being pulled by a leash. Our senses are pulling us here and there and everywhere. Good food, women, wine, this, that. But the Vedas say, no, control your senses. Because only then can you free your mind to think about truly spiritual matters. He says, "A woman's face is as attractive and beautiful as a blossoming lotus flower during autumn. Her words are very sweet and they give great pleasure to the ear. But if we study her heart, we can understand that at times it can be very kind and soft, and at times it can be extremely sharp like the blade of a razor. In these circumstances, he finds himself really stuck now. To satisfy, so he says, I've promised to give her a benediction, but this promise cannot be violated. So I have to live up to my promise, my word. But Indra does not deserve to be killed. So he comes up with a plot. And he tells her that if you follow my instructions regarding this vow for at least 1 year, you will surely get a son who will be able to kill Indra. However, if you deviate from this vow, you will get a son who will be favorable to Indra. So Diti agrees, yes, sure. And then he gives her a huge list of do's and don'ts, as well as rituals she has to perform for an entire year, and she can't mess up even once. And the list is so intricate that most people would never be able to follow it. Diti agrees. She then becomes pregnant with the semen of her husband. Now, Indra understands Diti's intention and wants to get her to break her promise. Now, they're related. Diti was his aunt, so he comes in some kind of disguised form and starts to serve her, to help her, to be friendly to her, to help her fulfill her vow. And all the while, he's waiting to find one fault, but can't find any. Thus, he's in great anxiety. On one occasion, Diti became weak. Well, as such, she had become weak and thin because of strictly following the principles of the vow. One day, she unfortunately neglected to wash her mouth, hands, and feet after eating and went to sleep during the evening twilight. All of those things had been forbidden. Then Indra, with his yogic powers, his siddhis, became extremely tiny and entered her womb. With his weapon, the thunderbolt, he cut her embryo into 7 parts, and then each part he divided into 7 more. At that point, 49 souls entered those parts, and they pleaded, "Dear Indra, we are the Maruts, your brothers. Why are you trying to kill us?" So that what was supposed to be 1 child now had become 49. "If you are all my brothers, you have nothing to fear from me," Indra said. Diti then worshipped Vishnu for a year and became completely purified. So as the more she went on with this process, she became purified. Her anger and rage came down. At the end of the year, she had 49 sons who were as brilliant as fire and were friendly with Indra, who now appeared before her. Diti was perplexed and wanted to know how this had happened. Indra then told her what had transpired and how, despite his cutting the embryo into so many parts, none of them died by the grace of Vishnu, by the grace of God. Those who are interested only in worshipping the supreme Godhead Vishnu do not desire anything material from him, not even liberation. Yet he, Krishna, fulfills all their desires. The ultimate goal of all ambitions, Indra says, is to become a servant of God. If an intelligent person serves the most dear Lord who gives himself to his devotees, how can that person desire material happiness? So then he says to her, O best of all women, Diti, I am a fool. Kindly excuse me for whatever offenses I have committed. Your 49 sons have been born unhurt because of your devotion. As an enemy, I cut them to pieces, but because of your great devotion, they did not die. So ultimately, those sons now go with Indra to the heavenly planets, and the story ends there. With that, we end the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, and I would love to hear your questions and see what you were thinking about as we were reading through this. Kundan, welcome. Good to have you here, my friend. I noticed that you made a comment here. I don't entirely agree with that because it depends on context. Would you like to explain yourself? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Let me get this off so that we can talk. All right. If you'd like to come on, I can bring you. I think I can bring you on. Let's see. Would you like to say something? No? Does anybody else have a comment? Would you like to come on onto the video and speak? Or would you like to write? You can type it out as well. I'll answer your comments right there. While you're typing, I'll just look at Celi's comments here. She says, hey, happy Halloween. Good. Happy Halloween to all of you as well. All right. So true. Life cycles bring us through sufferings and joys. Does the design of our lives intertwine groups with the karmic whole of the world? Life cycles bring us through sufferings and joys. Yes, we go through that. Does the design of our lives intertwine groups with the karmic whole? Yes, there is actually. Karma is not just individual. It's very much intertwined with everybody else's karma. And people engage in karma at a group level as well. In fact, what I do impacts others, and then they react. And so it becomes a group karma. It can be a family karma. It can be a country's karma. It can be a collective karma. Certainly. And people go through that together. And then they experience the positives and the negatives together. America has seen the results of positive karma from its early origins. Some other countries are seeing the results of negative karma from their early origins. People don't seem to learn, unfortunately, and they don't realize that certain things are resulting in the good that they have now, and their current actions are going to result in bad karma as they go forward. That's true for America. That's true for every country and every group of people in the world, and every family and every individual. So Indra goes on happily ever after. Yes, I guess so. Yeah, there's always some kind of resolution, some kind of place where Indra manages to make it, because I guess he's there trying to rule the universe to the best of his ability. But what we learn from these is that even a highly evolved being like Indra, who has got great yogic powers, as you notice, he could become smaller than the smallest, he's got powers of all kind, yet he becomes arrogant, yet he becomes carried away by all the opulence that he has. we are all in this place, in this boat. We are all subject to our desires, our needs, our fears, all of that, to the human condition. Now, the way out of that is the path of surrender, is the path of surrendering the ego. And it's not that the ego is a bad thing. We need it in this world to function. Absolutely. But just as you need a car and you're not your car, and you don't want to be overly identified with your car, similarly, we have an ego and we have a body and we have a mind, and we need to learn how to operate it and not be operated by it, not be under the control of the mind, not be under the control of the ego or of the world that we live in. To be truly free of them is the goal of our spirituality. Spirit actuality, to actualize our true spiritual self, to start to live from there. We are, in fact, perfect beings. But learning to actualize that is the goal of spirituality. Not learning to get better, not learning to improve ourselves. That's a losing battle. We will never get better. We can improve, we can do some things here and there, but essentially we're flawed. Essentially we're messed up. Essentially, as human beings, we do stupid things. And, there is no way to be perfect at all. We never will be. So we need to accept who we are with all our flaws, with all our imperfections, with all our fallibility. And as we accept that and learn to love ourselves as we are, we cultivate unconditional love. We're learning how to do that. If we were not flawed, we would never learn unconditional love. Can only learn it by being the messed up beings that we are. And it's likewise the people that we love, our children, our partners, they're all messed up too. And we need to learn to love them with their flaws. And as we do, we cultivate that quality, that divine quality, because that is the way God loves us, with all our flaws. He doesn't send us to hell, doesn't punish us, doesn't put us. We have karmic effects, yes, but that's part of the action and reaction system of this world. But God is neither positive, neither going to hate us or punish us or condemn us. No, never. You can be the worst of beings. You will never be condemned. You will never be hated. You will never be looked down upon. All of what you're going through is part of the process. What we start to learn through all these different stories and all these different histories and all these different narratives is that everyone, from the highest being to the lowest, is full of flaws. And all of them are loved and accepted by God. Now we need to learn to do that with each other and with ourselves. We need to understand that archetype, that role model of the divine being who loves all of us. And when we take that archetype to heart, we're able to then begin to love each other and love ourselves as God loves us. It's not a very difficult thing to do, but you need a role model and you need the examples, as you see here. Even here where Diti wanted to kill Indra, you see this point where it turns around. She gets purified and then she begins to respect Indra and lets her sons go off with him. We see in the case of Parvati, her anger because her husband Shiva had been insulted, her wanting to teach this person a lesson. And we also see her compassion at the end of it all and her willingness to see, he did not take it personally. He accepted the curse. And she understood this is a highly evolved being and that this experience now will only enrich him and will bring him closer to God. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry it became a little bit later today than we normally do, but I look forward to seeing you next week, and we will begin with the 7th canto then. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Krishna. Thank you for being here.